Hi, I'm Hannah.
Hi, I'm Abby.
And this is Spilling
the Ink Still podcast.
And we are back for the penultimate, that's a word that apparently I can't pronounce, the penultimate episode of season 4.
With our final guest.
I know, the final person we're going to speak to this year.
We're not going to talk anymore after this interview. We're just going to...
just become recluses.
Well, I mean, you're having a baby, so you probably are.
I probably am just going to speak to myself, I can't lie. It's going to be those...
Or speak to him.
Late night feeds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just getting, like, random voice memos from you, just being, like, chatting away.
Gradually losing my mind.
Yeah,
but it's an exciting final guest to have, isn't it?
Super exciting.
Very different.
Very different. Our first international guest, which we've kind of... I think we alluded to in the last episode.
Yeah. He's overseas.
He's overseas. He's across the pond.
In the States.
In the States. Absolutely. I think I said his name last week anyway, so it's not like I feel like I'm like hiding a secret. Oh my gosh. We are going to speak to the lovely Jeremy Melloul, who has been my mentor in video game writing for the last 18 months to 2 years. Mm-hmm. And he's been such a resource for me. He's been incredibly kind with his time, and I'm really passionate about video games, and I've been looking into like researching into writing them.
Yeah. See, I didn't know that until kind of you said, oh, you know, I've got this person I'd really like to put forward as a guest. I didn't realise you were having mentoring and writing video games. What made you decide to want to do that?
It was a really classic Abby moment where I was having a bit of a wobble about my career. This was before I got made redundant as well, so like the preceding wobble. Yeah. And my friend was like, you like writing and you like video games, why are you not writing video games? Mm. And it literally blew my mind. I was like, oh, that's a really obvious joint venture of both these two passions of mine. Yeah. And I applied to Limit Break, which is a mentorship program for people like early in games or trying to get into games, and I got paired with Jeremy, and the rest is history. Yeah. And we've been chatting for a while now. He's lovely. Yeah, absolutely great.
I just think it's fantastic. As soon as you kind of suggested why don't we get a games writer in, I thought of course, because that really is an area we've definitely not discussed throughout this podcast, and it's such a popular kind of area of writing. Why not kind of pick his brains and see what advice he's got for anybody maybe wanting to get into that.
Yeah, I think it's been a really funny thing of like curating this last season of guests, because the list is still so long, and it's something that's really sad. I'm sure we'll touch on it next week when we're sort of reflecting on the entire podcast. But like this is the last 2 episodes. There'll be this one and then another one, and maybe something else, but we'll see how we do it. But like the list of people we want to talk to is so long, and like there are more playwrights I want to touch on, and more video game writers, and we've been called to talk to journalists. So I think another thought I had was like political speech writers and like that sort of stuff. And there's just so many forms of writing, and this isn't a reflection of any of our guests. I think we've had the most beautiful, wonderful time. And I was sort of joking with you earlier. I feel like I finish every interview going, oh, they were my favourite. Like Bruce Forsyth, that's really good. I'm just like, oh, they were my favourite. And Hannah's like, it can't all be your favourite. And I'm like, oh.
I think that's it. When we started off, we very much just kind of went down our own individual routes of, you're going to do poetry, I'm going to do novel writing. And actually, as the seasons have gone on, we've realised, no, we can't just kind of constrain it in such a way. We've got to make sure we, really just show the possibilities and that are out there for people, and just what is available to them if they want to get into it.
And it's massively impacted in a positive way our writing, how we approach, and I say our writing, even just writing in general and stories in general. It's sort of transformed how all these creative tasks and prompts that we've been taking our way. We've been doing ourselves. Actually, we've definitely talked about the fact that they really help us, and they really help us realign with our writing, or like. Was it Rio's task where you were like, I want to change the form of something and make it into a monologue, and that was really interesting. Yeah. It's just really beautiful. So video game writing. Do you play video games or anything?
Not at all.
No.
I mean, I know about them though, because people in my family.
That was such like a grandma thing to say. I do know them.
Yes, I do know them. I'm aware they exist. But like, I just don't. Yeah, for me, I get far too into them. I think I've got a very, very addictive personality, so I have to be careful sometimes, because in the past when I've dipped my toe into a video game, I get sucked into it. I get far too invested, and I get too stressed, because it actually becomes me. I feel like I am the character, I am the person. So I actually have to kind of separate myself from it. But I've got lots of friends. I mean, you guys are obviously, you and Alex, it's a huge part of your life, your relationship, and my sister as well and her partner, they're really massively into video games, and a lot of my students are as well, and they want to talk to me about them, so I feel as though I've got to do a bit of research on them, just so that I can actually converse.
Get Alex to write you a little brief.
I just need to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
I think that's it. I just don't have the time, really, I don't think, to play them, because I would just lose entire nights. I know I would.
Yeah.
But what are you playing?
What am I playing?
What are you
playing
at? What do you go to?
Yeah, so Echoes of Wisdom, the most recent Legend of Zelda game, is delightful. Really pleasant, really lovely art style, very easy on the brain. Switch, it's handheld. Both me and Alex have sunk probably about 20-30 hours into it.
Wow.
Each. Not even like in total, like each. It's great. It's just this really lovely game where basically you have this magic power where you get to copy elements of the world and use that to explore. And it can be great because you can copy monsters. You can't really fight, but you can copy like monsters once you've killed them to fight other monsters, which is great. But you can also like copy elements, so like beds and trees and platforms and things, which is also really handy. Except it has a classic video game thing of people are like, you can see like a puzzle curve and you're like, I know exactly what the developer wants us to use for this, and people are like, nope, bed, and they will just like stare away their beds into like infinity, and it just works brilliantly and it's so funny. So yeah, playing a lot of Echoes of Wisdom at the minute, and then a card game called Balatro, which is, it's like poker hands, but you get these insane jokers. I think I might mention this to you before. You get these insane jokers that'll like do weird things and like you can make insane hands. And my friend Rob is like an absolute champion at it and can get like basically millions of points off one hand, which is very hard to do. And he is just lovely to play around because he always wants to do really well. So those are my two games at the minute.
See, it's interesting because to me, I'm kind of thinking, well, where does it has to be created from somewhere, doesn't it? And I remember actually one of the games I was obsessed with was Animal Crossing growing up, and I know that's made a little bit of a renaissance, hasn't it? Yeah,
a renaissance of Animal Crossing.
I used to love it, but then in actual fact, really, it's all about the player who dictates where the game goes. So as a games writer, I suppose you've got a really tricky task because you've got that element of it could go anywhere, so you've got to almost preempt every opportunity. I mean, it was really groundbreaking, wasn't it? Was it the Black Mirror thing where you got to choose?
Jabberwocky.
Was it?
Is it Jabberwocky?
Not, I don't think it was Jabberwocky. Wasn't it? I swear we know the B. Boulder Dash.
Oh, Boulder Dash.
Was that what it was called?
Alex. Yeah. What was the Netflix Black Mirror game? What was the Netflix
Bandersnatch.
Bandersnatch.
Thanks,
I knew it was something like that. Yeah.
Please can we keep this in the podcast?
If you want, sure.
That's what I was just thinking about. It must be really, really hard to write for a video game when a lot of what happens is up to the player. So
yeah,
quite interested to hear how Jeremy kind of
approaches that.
Yeah,
it's super interesting. Yeah, to sort of just like touch on it, like you do have like linear games where you can't explore, but you do have open world. Where you just wrote, which is what Animal Crossing is, and that's the extent of my lingo knowledge for.
Well, the games that so again, I'm there saying I don't have much experience, but my dad used to absolutely love playing video games growing up, and of course there's the FIFAs of this world and this, that, and the other. Yeah. But then there are games, I think, is kind of what you're talking about there, the linear ones, in terms of there is a storyline and you've got to progress along that storyline. Yes. I'm thinking I loved watching play like Resident Evil. Yeah. And like, I don't know, things like that where it's already pre-planned and you've just got to see how far along that storyline you can get. So
whereas like Zelda is open world, but there's sort of a linearness to it. I'd argue that like, I mean, there's probably people who are disagreeing with me, but I don't care. For me, like the best like open world I've played is Horizon Zero Dawn, which is this fantastic post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure where all these there's like the world has been reborn, there's all these tribes, and there's like historical tech, which is like tech of our era, but you're unpicking this past, and you get these like incredible vocal like diaries of like audio logs of people recording stuff, and you get to build this like past up out of it. And I will forever talk about it. The fact this game hugely affected me, like my creativity, and like I think about it all the time. I think about it as much as I think about my favourite books.
Yeah.
And that's fully open world, so you just can kind of like literally to a certain degree you can kind of get anywhere. The monsters do get harder though, so like you have to like have the ability to beat them. But to a certain degree you can go any way you sort of please.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Jeremy's video game writer, but he's also done board / tabletop games. He's done TV, and we'll get to his bio soon. Yeah. We'll get there. Sorry, I preempted myself.
Before we get on to Jeremy, we need to reflect on last week and the creative tasks that we set.
Following our lovely time with Helen, who was just so lovely.
Oh, God, lovely. There's just a lush conversation.
You finished the podcast, the interview, and you were like, I could have talked to her for like ever. Yeah. And I was like, I know. I was like trying to get you off the phone.
I know, just like that, you know, when you just meet someone who you just kind of could just click with, and I just really, really felt as though I could have just nattered away for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
But we, you know, the creative task that I set was something she mentioned very kind of early on in the conversation about how form really helps her. So we kind of said, why not go away, do a little bit of research on form, and see how that could influence your writing, and maybe your next creative project.
It's a very you thing to take. It was never going to be me going, oh yeah, I would love to research form.
Well, I hate form. I never write in form.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe we discussed this last week, sorry, but for me you feel like a really structurally, formy.
Not at all. I'm the complete opposite. I don't like form. I find it really restrictive. In my poetry I hate rhyme schemes. I never use rhyme. I don't like kind of making sure everything, I like it to sound good, but I don't like everything to have a strict syllabic pattern, you know. I find it very restrictive, so I was actually quite interested to see if there was a form out there for me. Still looking. I had a go. I don't like it.
No, I recently, Adrian from season 2, I read his second collection, and that was so interesting. His first collection is with you. I need to ask that back. It's not. This isn't like a ask now. I just need to remember you have it. And his first collection is like full of like really interesting form, and his second collection is less that, but it has these like amazing. I've gone slightly off on a tangent. I appreciate, but he's got this amazing short stories which are really, really good. But it was really interesting, like reading someone whose first collection was so like form based and like really intricate and like structured, and the second one didn't feel as much like it had that kind of build up around it, but it still worked really well. But yeah, no, I'm not a form person. Yeah, I'm not a form person.
Just feel as though when you're trying to shoehorn what you really want to say into this kind of framework, you don't really get what you want to say across, because you're just trying to, I don't know,
shoehorn what you want to say into the framework. Yeah.
I don't know. And I also found then that it just became very on the nose almost, because sometimes if it must rhyme, I found myself Googling what words rhyme with this, and I just found that a little bit tricky. I didn't like that. But maybe it's a practice thing as well. But yeah, I'm still researching form. So if you also decided to take up that creative task and found it wasn't for you, that's all right. Me too.
Yeah, that's the joy of this.
What about you?
Yeah, mine was to do with verbatim theatre, and I touched on it last week. We've just lost my great uncle, my uncle Brian, who's my nan's younger brother. In fact, today I feel a little bit deflated. We've just come back from his funeral in Liverpool, which was really nice. I'm really lucky that my parents were vicars, but they did it together, which was really lovely. And I didn't action this, so I was surrounded by family, because my nan was the eldest of 8, and there's quite a few siblings there and like people around. And it's really funny because a lot of these people I hadn't seen since my granddad's funeral back in 2017. And you do that classic catching up thing where you realise that their lives have just like slingshotted forwards. Like I was asking about my mum's cousin's son. And I was like, oh, is he in uni now? And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, sorry. She's like, he's 22. He graduated last year. I was like, oh, because I thought I'd like overshot and he was too young for that. So yeah, that was a really rambling. That was a boulder-dashy answer of basically I was around a lot of family and I realised how much of the family I want to talk to. And I guess an interesting one would be my nan being one of 8, talking to the sort of last living siblings. and hearing what they have to say, and what they remember. Because I realised staying in my Uncle Brian's eulogy, my great granddad was called Walter. I had no idea. Because you just call him granddad. They were granddad and nanny, and my mum doesn't do like great uncle, your great grandma. It's just nanny. Like it's my nanny and then her nanny, basically. So no, I haven't actioned it, but I think I definitely sort of talked to that side of the family and start getting a bit together. I don't know what it's going to lead to, but it's also really nice because they're all Scouse, so I love listening to the accent. It's really nice to be around them. So yeah, again, that was a bit of a ramble, but yeah, basically haven't actioned it.
I think it's a really good place to start if you're starting out on a new creative project, isn't it? It's kind of speaking to people and gathering their experiences, and seeing how much you can kind of become inspired by them. And just I think it's just a really great opportunity as well to almost reconnect with parts of yourself and your family that you potentially didn't know anything about before. So it's definitely a task that I think, even if you're not done it this week, gosh, definitely make sure you do it at least once, because you might regret it, sadly.
I think I told it last time. I do. I regret not writing more of my granddad's stories down and stuff, and it was really it's important. Basically, it's important to be your family's historian and have those things on hand. It's been a funny week, but like it's a good thing to. I think I might stew on it. It's one of those things I kind of like reflect on in a few months' time and figure out what I want to do with it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Shall we move on to then today's episode and Jeremy?
Should we read his bio before we go chat to him? I feel like I've touched on quite a lot about him, so I'm just gonna go straight in. Jeremy Melloul is a science fiction and fantasy writer in Los Angeles, California, who enjoys using genre as a way to explore the hardest parts of life, like grief, purpose, and loneliness. Jeremy has worked across mediums, writing for AAA video games, tabletop role-playing games, comic books, and film and TV. Not much.
We've got someone who's really kind of spreading across the mediums today, haven't we?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. There's a lot there that we haven't touched on. In fact, I think we haven't touched on any of them. So we're going to have a big job picking Jeremy's brains.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, should we have a chat?
Yeah, let's go find out about Jeremy, our friend across the seas.
Lovely stuff. So we are here with our final guest of the Spilling Ink season and entirety.
The entire podcast,
which is really exciting. We're joined by Jeremy Melloul. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. And final guest is, it's a big honor in this podcast project you guys have been doing.
Yeah, no, it was an obvious choice.
It's lots of first as well, first overseas guests as well, if you are picking up on the accent. So whereabouts are you coming to us from today?
Yeah, so I'm in the United States. I'm in Los Angeles.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you found that very exciting when I told you. You're like,
we're going global, guys.
We're going global.
Honestly, we're
taking it stateside.
Everyone's always so excited to hear from Americans, right?
Yeah, we love the accent. It's great. But no, it's really lovely to have you. Thanks, Jeremy. And I mean, we'll get more into it. But you are our first. I mean, so to give a bit of background to our listeners, you've been mentoring me for a while on video game writing, which is how we met, and we've just kind of trickled along since then, which has been really nice. And we've been talking for a while, but I hadn't quite realised your portfolio of work. So it's really exciting to have you on talking about that. And that leads us nicely into our first question, which is, please could you introduce yourself and your work in your own words?
Yeah, sure. So I usually start by saying I'm a science fiction fantasy writer. I've worked across mediums. So I've worked in comic books, I've worked in film and TV, video games, I've designed for tabletop role-playing games. I think working across mediums for me is a big part of how I keep myself interested, and I just try to follow my curiosity, and it helps keep the work passion-driven as opposed to just being getting bogged down in the career of it all, which can be really up and down. And I think my journey has really been classically a very up and down, side to side writer journey where things go from going well to not, and you're always navigating new changes and challenges. In terms of the kinds of stories I like to tell, fiction played a really big role in my upbringing and, sometimes what was a difficult family environment. And so I like to write stories to kind of serve the same purpose and try to help people going through what I consider some of the hardest parts of life, like grief and loneliness, sense of purpose. And so I like genre in particular because I think it allows you to dramatize a lot of those subjects in a way that non-genre stories can sometimes struggle to get into as much depth or nuance, or just allow you to take those elements from a different perspective than reality often lets you.
Yeah,
amazing,
brilliant. So I mean, you kind of mentioned the fact that you have kind of channeled quite a few different mediums there. What would you consider to be your favorite and why?
Yeah, I don't know that I really have a favorite medium. I think that part of working in all the different mediums is really having to appreciate, even, learning and having to appreciate what's unique about each medium and how they lend themselves to certain kinds of stories. I think comics was really the first medium where I pursued it professionally and wanted to make a living at it, and thought that I could, just write comics, even though that was never like my goal. Part of what I really love about comics is getting to work with an artist. There's something really special about sharing your vision in that kind of tight collaboration, and turning something you've written into something visual is always really, really special. I think screenwriting also holds a pretty dear place in my heart, because screenwriting was really where I fell in love with writing, and was obsessed with film in high school, and studied at a film charter school here in LA, where I got to do a lot of screenwriting and learn that at a really early age. And so that definitely fed my passion and appreciation for like creative arts in general. So I think there's different things I appreciate about each one, but for what's coming to mind right now, I think somewhere between comics and screenwriting is probably where there's the most affection, just based off my history with it.
Yeah. I imagine it's quite challenging as well, because as you're writing, you've got to think about how it's going to transfer visually as well. And I imagine that relationship between either your illustrator or your producer would be quite challenging at times if you've got, I don't know, I've never written poet books, and I've never written a screenplay, but I can definitely imagine it being quite tricky to find someone who you can almost transfer your vision onto, if that makes sense. As you've written it, they kind of get in on that level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration can be a really tenuous project or process. And at its best, it's really special, right? If you can find someone who you're both comfortable working with each other to understand each other, and you get to what I like to call like a third voice, where it's not your two voices working together. It's you guys creating something new that you could only create in collaboration with each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not a particularly visual person. I have a lot of trouble visualizing. And so that's been something I've learned along the way, because I love visuals and I love these mediums, but it never came naturally to me in my writing. And I think that made it easier for me in some ways to give more credence and more responsibility to my collaborative partners, and trust them as artists to hold the weight of the visuals, while not thrusting it all upon them, and still having conversations about it, but each of us trusting each other to do what we're best at, and hopefully get to the best end result that we can make.
Yeah,
I love that. And it's really nice because as we've been picking guests through the seasons, we've gravitated toward poets just because we're in a big sort of poetry community. We've been really trying to thread in more. And when it came to the last guest we had spaces, I was like, first of all, video games, that's how we know each other, which has been really, really nice to talk to you about, and swap recommendations has always been fun. But I realised I hadn't had a video game writer on, and then that's when obviously I knew you talked creatively about your projects, but you sort of like, you're chatting away, and then suddenly you realise like the scope of what you've been doing. It was really exciting.
Yeah.
And it's really intriguing to sort of see these sort of threads fitting together on how you sort of make things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's messy, and I don't know that I would recommend it to anyone unless you really, really were driven to dip your toes into all these mediums. I think I would probably be farther into any one career if I wasn't splitting my attention across so many. But so much of pursuing creativity, as is kind of nowadays, I think, about deciding how much you're willing to ignore the sort of pressures of the financial side.
Yes.
And what that where on that spectrum you want to fall between sacrificing finances versus sacrificing, just the inherent chaos that can come with just following your interests and passions and creating projects that maybe don't have good financial ends. And I mean, ideally, obviously you do neither, and you can be really, really successful doing exactly what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But that's obviously like a bad plan to go in with. And I think I've had trouble navigating it. It's taken me, I've been pursuing this career sort of professionally and working in it sometimes more successfully than not for about 11 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long time, and it's taken me, I'm still, I think, figuring out how do I talk about all these different projects in a way that doesn't leave me tongue-tied and makes it clear to whoever I'm talking about what I work on, and that it's not quite as chaotic as it sometimes can sound, even though, it definitely can be.
Yeah, well, it seems like everything that you are kind of involved in, it all boils down to the fundamental thing of just good writing, like a good kind of storyline and that people can hook into. But then it's as you said, you then just apply it to different mediums. So I think that's why this is going to be a really useful conversation for a lot of our listeners, because I think people genuinely wouldn't consider, actually, if you can write a good story, there is no reason why you couldn't be a game writer, or that you couldn't be a comic book writer. I think we're really bad at putting ourselves into these boxes and categories, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And in actual fact, they do interlink and they do kind of branch out to each other. I think this will be really useful for quite a few people, I think, today, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. If you have the basic skill set of being able to tell a story, and I think so much of that comes down to being aware and cultivating an awareness of how your audience is receiving your story, that's a skill set that will carry through in any professional medium. You just then have to be willing to do the work to learn what's unique about the individual mediums you want to work in, right? And build those skill sets. And that's something that takes a lot of time. And often when you're coming from a place of not knowing, it takes a lot of either like humility and willingness to like all of a sudden be completely new and unaware when you're maybe a competent writer, but you're now trying to work in a different medium where you're essentially a novice again. So you need to have that humility, and then also that like willingness to research and do the work. And you can't just wait for it to kind of magically work, because you're going to be kind of behind, so to speak, by splitting your attention that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of ties in nicely to the next question we asked you. We sort of sent you in advance, which was, how do you approach swapping between mediums when working on different projects? Because I know from experience, just talking to you recently, that you've got quite a lot going on creatively. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's always a work in progress. I usually find that creating some amount of like boundary on my time and limiting the amount of different things I work on in a day is usually really helpful. There are definitely days where I find myself wanting to hop, skip, and jump between lots of different things. And in that point, there's not really much effort at this point, because I think I'm past the point where I'm, not familiar with how these mediums work. And so I'm not needing to like refamiliarize myself. But when I do find myself either like lacking the confidence or genuinely, not remembering how to handle a certain kind of transition in a screenplay because it's been however long and I've been working on other things, just going back to doing the same kind of like relearning, whether it's watching YouTube videos or reading books about the topic, can be really helpful to keep my brain back to that work. And if I can cultivate focus by just dedicating a whole day or a whole part of a day or blocks of weeks at a time on individual projects, I find that it's much easier to be immersed in it, and the cost of switching projects is a lot lower, right? Like the concept of task switching as something that has sort of a mental cost when you're moving between work is true no matter what you're doing. I find that it's really emphasized and becomes even more costly when you're trying to utilize the same skill, but in a different medium where the format of what you're doing is different, where the business plan is completely different. And so I think being really careful with, knowing that I only have so much energy and not wanting to lose as much of it between switching tasks is a really key part of making it so I can maintain these different commitments across projects. And I think it's telling that I'm still trying to reduce the amount of different stuff I'm working on. Like, I don't see myself not working in those mediums, but I am constantly trying to make it so I can focus on one thing at a time as much as possible. And then just have my side projects for, those hours when I'm exhausted on one thing and it's actually a relief to go and work on something else.
Yeah. What are you working on at the moment, out of curiosity? Are you allowed to divulge, or?
Yeah, I can talk about it sort of in abstract. I sold a feature film last year, and so that's been a big commitment and a big part of what I'm working on. That's really like that main project that I talk about.
Nice.
I also have been developing a role-playing game for a few years that I started developing during COVID, and went through sort of several iterations with, and I'm now building towards hopefully a Kickstarter campaign to independently publish it in the spring of next year. And then I've got a couple comic projects that I'm tinkering with. I've really been trying to turn my attention more to things that I can independently finance and produce, because I think despite having worked this long, one of my frustrations has been not seeing that stuff come to light, or, stuff getting lost in production, right? Especially in film and TV, you can work on things and then nobody sees them. Nobody ends up getting to enjoy them. No audience ever receives them. Everyone only reads them with like a critical eye, as opposed to with the eye of an audience, which I think is generally A, more forgiving, but B, almost more empathetic and like wants to understand what you have to say or wants to be entertained. Where a lot of people who are reading it for like a business purpose, they don't want to be entertained. They want to be convinced that this is a profitable enterprise, and that they don't read it the same way. And that's not who I'm writing for. So I think, not to, constantly go on rants beyond what you asked, but I'm working on a lot of smaller projects that I'm hoping I can get across the finish line, namely those comics and the role-playing game. And I think having 3 projects is less than I've had in like many years. So that feels really good, for me.
No,
yeah,
that's really, really good. And it's so interesting. I think I just want to backtrack slightly and just say how eloquent your answer was about processing like swaps between projects, because all I could see was like that like classic Always Sunny like gif where he's got like the pinboard,
totally.
and that's all I could imagine, like tracing you around these projects. But it sounds like it's a really exciting time for you, and like just really fun stuff going on. Are you enjoying this time? Is it like something that's, are you taking pleasure in it, or is it a lot of pressure?
It's both, right? Like, I think it's, so much of taking both like negative and positive experiences at the same time is realizing they don't cancel or balance out. You just have more negative and more positive, and you have to try to like enjoy the positive without letting the negative overwhelm you. So, we met through a UK mentorship like program for video game writing, because I was working for a video game company that was based in the UK. They ended up moving all of their development out of the US, like all the development they were doing in the US, they ended up shutting down. And so that left me without a job and part of the giant wave of video game layoffs that have been happening around the world. And I was still working on my side projects even while I was at that company, but it was, earlier than I would have chosen to leave and focus on all that. And so I think that's where the pressure comes in of just, we live in a world where you don't, especially in America, right? Like, there's not really a safety net financially that's provided by the government or anything like that. You really have to be responsible for yourself. I'm very lucky that I've been able to provide myself some of that security, that I have, a partner and family that can support me to at least like, continue to have insurance throughout this time, in addition to like the other work, because there's a huge possibility that I wouldn't be able to have that if I wasn't making money. And so I think that's the part that's stressful. And so much of my like mental effort goes into just really trying to enjoy and appreciate the fact that, I'm getting to choose the projects that I'm working on right now, or I'm working on things that came from my mind or that I have a big hand in, as opposed to just being, part of a larger machine, which can be really fun and exciting in its own way. This is something I'm really familiar with. And before that job in video games, I'd been working for myself and working on self-generated projects for the majority of my career already. So it definitely feels familiar, and it definitely feels satisfying, especially now that I'm really, really settled on just restraining the scope of my projects just so that I know I can release them. It's more exciting to look ahead towards next year, even though these things take a while, and say, hey, in April, I'm going to have this Kickstarter. By the end of the year, hopefully it'll be in, the game will be in people's hands. They'll be able to play it, and so on and so forth. And I think that's what's really like driving my excitement right now, because I think it's so easy to get cynical over time, especially, these careers are so hard, and you can spend so much time and you can project so many goals and ideas of what your career might be like, or the things you might accomplish, or the way your books might reach people. And life is never that, straight line up and to the right in terms of progress. And so when you fail to hit those goals that you set for yourself, I think you start to create a lot of like animosity, and I think like self animosity. And I think cynicism is like a natural result of that. And I'm not a naturally cynical or a naturally bitter person. And so just staying kind of like actively on guard to that, and actively trying to like work on things that I really care about, that I'm really excited about, for me has been, has made this period fun, but also it's still very stressful. It hasn't canceled out. I wish it could just cancel out, but you just kind of have to hold both things. And I think that's where I'm finding myself.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm going a bit off piece.
Sorry.
But I just I find it really intriguing. I mean, during the process of writing then, how much would you say you kind of split your mindset between your own idea and kind of you enjoying writing about something you've come up with? How much of the writing process is taken up by the audience, kind of thinking about how you're going to market to the audience? Is it what the audience want? Do you find you have to keep an eye on what's trending,
Yeah, so my approach tends to be that I try not to worry about what the audience wants in terms of actual content. And I worry about what they want in terms of like product. So let's take like a comic, for example. I'm concerned with what they want as far as how many pages of story am I providing them? How expensive is this comic going to be? Can I deliver it in a way where they're going to be excited about it? Is the art going to be compelling for them? Is the story going to be something that's going to make them want to keep reading? But I'm not necessarily letting it drive what I'm choosing to write, because what I'm choosing to write is things that I'm writing for, for me, it's really for that like inner child inside of me who was sad and like found solace in stories. And like my dedication to writing has been definitely informed by those experiences, and is a way for me to sort of like make sense of the bad by making something good of it, right? Yeah. Like it's, and it doesn't really matter if it's logical or objectively true or not, right? But from my experience, I know like I went through these things that were hard and that were difficult, and for me it blunts them a little bit to be able to take from those all that hurt and all that, hopefully growth that's come from them, and turn them into narratives that can hopefully help other people. And so I'm really concerned mostly with like myself when I'm creating these stories, and are they, really compelling to me? But I think like wanting it to be compelling to the audience sort of goes hand in hand with that. And the only way where it really changes is, like if it's going to be too short for a marketable product. I just think it's two different lines of thoughts. And I think a lot of like artists tend to be hesitant to really engage with the business side because they get that conflated, right? They think the business side is going to then influence what they write. But if you start doing that, I mean, there's some writers who can do that and pursue it like purely commercially, and that's totally fine. But if a lot of people know that that's not the kind of writing that they want to do, or that's not the way that they want to engage with their art. And for me, I feel the same, right? Like I want it to be really compelling. I want it to hook. So like, and I don't feel constrained by things that might come from that, like saying like, oh, I want the ending to really make them want to read the next one, right? Like that doesn't feel like it's a constraint that's going to hurt the kinds of stories I want to tell. It just feels like it's helpful, really, right? Because you can write anything and you can write it any way you want, and there's not really a right or wrong way to approach any of that. But knowing that there's these sort of things that you can aspire to that are only going to give your story a better chance of reaching more people and of continuing, that's helpful for me, at least, than like figuring out how to structure the stories I want to tell. I hope it hasn't been all over the place. I feel like, you guys are asking great questions and there's so much that we could talk about in each one.
No, definitely not. No, it's really interesting just hearing you speak, actually, because this is an area that I truly don't feel I'm that clued up on. And I think something that has always put me off. I don't know how I feel it's different from novel writing and poetry, but I always see it as very financially driven, kind of how many of these games can we sell, how many people can get hooked on these things, on these comics. And it kind of feels as though, in actual fact, just by trying to read the market, you're almost then just producing a regurgitation of what's already existing on the market. And then it's like, well, then how do you be new and unique? Because how do you know what's going to work? And I just think it's a risky field. And I guess I'm intrigued to just meet anybody who's in that area. So yeah, really great answers.
No, I think that's like a good, you're saying, right, that you're someone who like isn't as familiar with it, but I think these are reflections that people in these industries make all the time, right? And I think a lot of the common understanding is like a lot of these trends are cyclical, right? So if you're trying to time the market, you're going to struggle, partially because of that, and partially because these projects take so long to get made, right? It's the classic idea of like vampire movies are all the rage. Let's make vampire movies, and it takes like 3 years for your vampire movie to come out, and by then the audience has grown up, right, more, and their tastes have changed, and now they're like, well, I'm tired of vampire movies, and then it comes back around in 20 years. And so I think, for me, the formula for, that's I'm hearing what I'm about to say, and I'm regretting it already because it feels too like enshrined, as if it's like too big of a claim. But like the formula for success, not in terms of like a defined A plus B equals success, but in terms of what are the things that you need to do as a creative to be successful. It's much more reliable to focus on what you're really interested in and try to cultivate a connection with an audience that's similarly interested in what you are than it is to try to play to this broad market that you can't even reach most of the time, because most creatives aren't doing marketing. And if they are, they don't have the budgets or the know-how to compete with the bigger companies that are going to be able to deliver products like that much better, whether we're talking film, games, comics, board games. Like I think that holds true novels, right? Like obviously indie publishing and self-publishing with Amazon, Kindle, all of that, it's massively popular. But you're never going to be able to beat people at their own game. It's like the classic David and Goliath, right? Like David doesn't beat Goliath by fighting him the same way he's going to be fought. He fights with his own tools, with his own methods. And I think for indie creators, or for creators earlier in their careers, or for creators who don't have the resources as these bigger companies, which is a huge amount of people, it's all about that like connection with your audience. And hopefully, if you're not always, but a lot of the times, I think writers tend to be fans of the kinds of things that they write, right? There are definitely people who read outside of what they like to create. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you're being self-critical in a constructive way and challenging yourself to create more compelling stories in whatever form you're doing it, and you're making sure you get those stories in front of people and getting honest feedback on it, whether that feedback is qualitative in terms of like actual reviews or things that they're saying, or quantitative in terms of like your self-publishing, and you can see the data on how your things are doing, you can then learn, grow, change your approach, change your decisions to hopefully have a better result the next time. And over time, you hopefully grow an audience that's interested in following along with you. I think doing things like staying in the same genre or telling similar kinds of stories can help with that, but I don't know that it's necessary. And I think it's actually not constructive or not helpful if that's going to sap your energy to write, right? Like the most important is to keep writing, keep making stuff. I don't know that it's more advantageous to like torture yourself writing your 5th fantasy novel just because you think you really need to be niched down when you have this like sci-fi idea you really want to do, that you could maybe write 3 times as quickly because you're so passionate about it, and that you're going to be more willing to market and get in front of people because you're more excited about it. Even if you'll lose some people because they only read fantasy and they don't care about your new sci-fi book, there's still going to be threads, right? Like I talked when I introduced myself, like I think knowing the kinds of threads that follow in your writing, like mine being grief, friendship, loneliness, like these are themes that I struggle with, and these are themes that find themselves in my works, no matter like what they are. And so identifying those will help me hopefully relate to an audience regardless of genre, right? In a way that transcends sort of the commercial boxes of genre that are, you know, whether it's YA or middle grade or fantasy or sci-fi, right? Like some people follow those, but in a lot of ways, these are boxes that are made because of like distribution and because of the business practices and the way these things are distributed, not necessarily in the way that they're going to appeal to an audience.
Yeah, definitely. Great answers. Absolutely wonderful stuff. To take it back to the reason that we met, video games. Obviously, you have a lot of experience games writing, but how do you find writing for video games is different from writing for your role-playing game or tabletop games?
Yeah. So I was really lucky, honestly, with the job that I had. I mean, despite, you know, the layoff and everything like that, I was working for a big AAA company. That's like a very particular kind of experience. And I think writing for indie games can be pretty different. The biggest is really just a matter of scale, which is why I was pursuing it in the first place. I was really working on a lot of small indie projects, and those teams are really limited in size. And then I moved to a company that was 800 people and grew to 1,300 in the time that I was there. That's obviously going to be very, very different. So I think it's much more like, to break it down, I think scale is the biggest thing, right? Like you're just working as part of a much larger structure. Your role is much more specific. You have a lot more of those commercial restrictions coming into play because they're being dictated by the goals of the business, which when it's a multi-million-dollar enterprise, right? Like those things take precedence, and obviously the people driving the company, that's a big part of their priorities and what they care for. Whereas it doesn't really matter as much in other mediums, just because the scale tends to not be the same in terms of cost, in terms of amount of people working on it. The other piece of it is like just the actual writing that you're doing, right? Like we've talked a lot about all the different kinds of writing that occur in video game writing. And I think when you're writing poetry, right, like there's obviously a lot of different forms, or when you're writing novels, right, there's different styles, different lengths, different, genres like we've talked about. But writing for video games, I find, has like the widest variety of actual formats of writing, right? Like I've written screenplays for my video game writing. I've written short stories for my video game writing. I've written little text blurbs for the video game writing. And so I think having a mastery of those different mediums actually makes you better equipped to work in those mediums. Now, does it make you more employable? No, not necessarily, but I think it does make you more equipped in terms of like actually being able to do the job better. So I think video games, you need to have that flexibility and that willingness to dip your toes into different formats. And then you need to be able to write for the goals of the company as opposed to like writing for yourself, right? Like, can you strip your own voice out of what you're writing? And can you take these sets of goals that they have in terms of what the voice of the company should be, the voice of the narrative, the length that they need certain things to be, or the kinds of stories they want you to tell, which may not be the thing you're most interested in, right? But might be the thing that they want to push, or might be the thing that the audience is most interested in. You really have to be able to set aside your own desires a little more, allow them to take a back seat to those other necessities. And again, ideally, you find places where they coincide, but that's not always feasible. And hopefully, you're bringing the best of yourself to it, no matter what. Ideally, you find employment in a game that's still in a genre you care about, right? I was working on a huge sci-fi game that's right up my alley, and I was able to find ways to tell the kinds of stories I was excited about within that in a way that was touching on things that the audience wanted to know more about, in a way that worked within the structure of what the company required of me as a writer.
Amazing. Yeah, really, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of next question that we have, how do you think your experience working on games supports your writing for film and TV? How does it kind of influence that?
Yeah, that's a good question. My experience
having the interactive element. Sorry, I'm just thinking then that the interactive element must also be quite a key component.
Yeah, and no, it's I don't know if it has, and that's not to say I don't know if it can, but I just don't know if it has for me. I think I haven't been staffed on a TV show, and the way TV runs now is very different. And so writers aren't as involved with the entirety of the process as they used to be by and large. Whereas in gaming, our narrative team was involved with things at conception and then either got to follow it through the development process or got to come back at the end to recalibrate and make sure that some of the initial intent came through, or to make adjustments based off however the design briefs had changed. I think TV can be like that and has been like that. I don't know if it still is, and I don't really have the actual experience to speak to that. And film for now, because I haven't really either produced, has been more similar to my small indie projects, because it's been a lot of like writing on my own, and then you bring it to somebody and you get some feedback, and then you go back and make those edits. If anything, the best place is maybe like gaming has really taught me, like what I was saying about setting aside my own desires, right? In film, if you're selling a screenplay, you don't keep any rights to it, and so you're still working on it, but you're now beholden to the people you've sold it to, for them to tell you what they want it to be. And ideally, they trust you enough to take your perspective into account. But, at the end of the day, if it's A or B and you want A and they want B, you're going to do B, because that's what they're paying you to do. And that's the sort of trade-off there. And I think working in gaming has helped me better navigate that and really understand the importance of how do you communicate a narrative vision to people who aren't narrative. That's a really challenging thing that I hadn't really had to worry about much beforehand, right? In comics, working with artists, ideally my collaborators trusted me to know that, like, okay, the story is my responsibility, and if there's things in the visuals that are undermining that, they're open to adjusting it because I'm telling them, but they're also trusting me to not just change stuff in their visuals for no reason if they have a preference for how it should be, written. But they already have some kind of storytelling instinct in there. And a lot of people in film obviously have that instinct as well, but not always. And so I think knowing how you can communicate narrative and your vision to someone who doesn't have that experience, which happens a ton in games, right, where you're dealing with business or you're dealing with, developers who are more technically inclined, maybe that's the best way where my experience in games has helped me, or probably will help me moving forward in film and TV.
Yeah, super helpful. And like Hannah just touched on, sort of interactive ability of of games in general. Like you're sort of beholden to a very different kind of audience that has to interact. You can't be passive. Well, you can arguably sit passively in like a video game, but you'll just get endless amounts of prompts from the game to move on into the next room. Whereas I guess you can rewatch episodes or films, or like you'll see like a big thing on like social media is like lots of clips of films that are like big twists being revealed, and it's just interesting having those two different interactions where like games you have to be actively in it, whereas film and TV feel more passive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a massive difference in terms of like how they're actually experienced and things you actually end up needing to take into account in the actual writing, right? Like it's all pacing essentially, usually, right? Like when you sit down for a movie, the movie is determining the pacing. 100% of that determination is on them. When you're, playing a game, way more, depending on the game, way more of that decision is in your control as the player, right? And the game might annoyingly keep urging you out of the room, like you said, but ultimately it's up to you, right? And I know I've done it before where you sit around an NPC or you wait in a room to see like, when do they start repeating lines, right? Like how much do they have to say to me until I move on to go do the next thing? And I think books and comics fall somewhere in the middle where the actual narrative is static, but you're still making a decision to turn the page. And that's a really important pacing tool. So yeah, I think you're spot on, and that's a really big consideration in terms of like the actual writing. What's hard with games is that you're rarely, at least I've not gotten to control the pacing from place to place usually, right? I'm writing a piece that's experienced in one area, and then everyone is all sort of coming together to create this overall experience that gets us that creates that through line from one room to the next room, so to speak. Whereas in other mediums, you're controlling the entirety of that vision, or at least you're influencing the entirety of that vision much more readily.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we've talked a lot of, kind of about the variety of mediums that you kind of touch on and that you have experience with. If you were kind of at the beginning of your career again, what advice would you give to writers who are wanting to kind of maybe dip their toe into different mediums and get that experience? Where do they begin these days?
Yeah.
It's a big one.
I think that, I mean, this could be a whole podcast just on its own, just talking about like strategies for the beginning of your career, especially if you want to work in a variety of mediums. I think you need to first, and this is hard because you don't have the awareness at the start of your career to understand what you're agreeing to, but you need to understand that committing to a variety of mediums upfront is an obstacle, right? You are making it harder for yourself. It's like playing a game on hard instead of normal, right? Like that's something you need to like accept going in. And you might not realize, you probably won't realize upfront in the same way I didn't, how and all the ways that manifests. But, you know, depending on your exposure to it so far, you might already have encountered some difficulties. So first decide, like, are you willing to take on that increased difficulty? And if you say yes, don't feel beholden to that answer. Feel free to change your mind at any time, right? Like I think there's pride and there's so many emotions that can come into play in creative careers that we can consider ourselves beholden to these like past commitments we've made to ourselves when we shouldn't, right? This isn't like a commitment that's like, you know, for your own health or something. This is a commitment based out of like ambition or desire, right? These are not the things that we should be beholden to. So for me, that's like the first piece. I think the second piece then is like, can you be patient? Which I couldn't, right? Like I'm a very impatient, stubborn person. All the patience and whatever the opposite of stubbornness is, pliability or something, that have in my career has been hard earned and hard learned. If you can be patient, focus your efforts in one medium. Focusing your efforts in one medium to then move on to another medium, even if you're still writing in that medium. I just mean in terms of like actual professional ambitions and like the proportion of time, whether it's like 80% on the main thing and 20% on the other stuff. I think that's a reasonable amount. If you focus on one medium, you're much more likely to go a lot further in that medium. And it makes it a lot easier then to move into other things than it is to, you know, be an inch deep and a mile wide. It doesn't leave you a lot of space to build momentum or to carry over, right? But if you have a really successful comic and you're a successful comic writer, plenty of some successful comic writers over the years have transitioned into writing for TV, right? When all the superhero TV shows were coming out, they were a big part of that. Or writing for games because it's much more profitable and, you know, secure and stable than working for comics. And it's not just about the professional side. I think you'll be a better writer, right? Like I had, you know, have accepted that like I'm never going to be the like best comic writer or the best novelist or the, you know, like that's not my goal really. And like, what does that mean? Obviously it's all subjective, but I know that like what I care about is something kind of beyond that, outside of like that level of achievement. But hopefully you have that awareness to at least know what you're risking by working across a lot of different things. The third point is you know, sort of equally important. These aren't like in a hierarchy necessarily, but acts as a sort of counterbalance to everything else. And it's focus on making stuff and start really small as you can. I think making stuff is like the antidote to 90% of what we struggle with as writers and as artists, like actually getting things produced and to an audience, right? Like that is you might not be writing for an audience, but if this is something you want to do professionally, that is a part of this process you definitely can't ignore. Right. And I think even if you don't care about doing it professionally, it's a really important part of growing as a creator and understanding like what people see and hear and receive when you're putting your work and your words and so much of what's personal to you out there in whatever form of art you're following. And starting small and not having some kind of ego about like, no, but I want to do it this way, or some strong ideas on like how you want to build your career. The reality is like, whatever you think your career is going to be like, it's not going to be like that, right? And you might get close, you might not. Like, it shouldn't matter. If you can cultivate a lack of attachment to how your career is going to be, and instead focus on the key parts of the work that are key, which is actually doing the work and getting it out, then you start to build in a much more successful way. Even if you're splitting your attention and every year you're working on a project for a different medium, at the end of 5 years, like if you've produced something, you're going to be ahead of 99% of people. And so start small, start within your means. Like, I think, like, I don't necessarily always agree with like wait to write the thing you really want to until you're good enough of a writer to be able to deliver on it. I think that's like can be a kind of a trap that we fall in on, but it's all personal, right? Everyone has their own individual landscape to navigate in terms of making those decisions. And I think whatever that landscape is, if you're focused on getting things made and released, you're going to be better off no matter what. So if you're going to take away one piece of advice and like ignore the rest, I think that's really the one to follow most of all, and make it like purchasable, and don't just like, I finished things and then I didn't like market it. I didn't like push it. I used it as like a calling card professionally and tried to navigate, use them to like help my career along in terms of like my professional relationships with other writers, artists, editors, things like that in comics, when really I think I should have just been not doing that, but really focusing on an audience and how am I connecting to an audience, whether it starts with friends and family and then it's your local audience and then you slowly kind of build upon that. It's just going to serve you forever.
Yeah, we had this season 2 episodes ago Matt Abbott on, and he talked about writing poetry for people and not for poets. And I think that is like, it's nice as it is, but I think it applies to a lot of writing, is actually writing for people and not for writers, I guess, how we would put it, but like not, or writing for readers, I guess, but yeah, making it like accessible to people and not instantly narrowing down your audience.
Yeah. I think that countermands a lot of like the sort of stick in the mud attitudes that like artists of all sorts can have, particularly when it comes to marketing and business, right? Those are the biggest areas. Look, like, is it fair that if you want to be a successful creator, you probably need to learn how to do business and marketing? No, but like not a lot of things are fair. And like that's, you kind of have to choose whether to take that on. Some people are lucky and like, get to not, but that's not a plan, right, to pursue. And you only have to follow it as far as you need to, right? That's where the choices between like self-publishing or going and getting published traditionally come in. But just don't get stuck. Like those things you can lose so much time waiting to get published when you're better served self-publishing and then eventually working with a publisher down the line, right? Mm-hmm. Like that, I don't think they should be considered alternate paths. I think they're all kind of tools. And if you've spent a few years trying to get published and not gotten anywhere with that, like just start releasing stuff on your own and, satisfy yourself. Like we're so lucky as writers. Like I talk to a lot of actors here in LA and I really empathize with them. And one of my best friends is an actor and he's really talented, like very talented. But all these industries take so much luck to succeed in. And as actors in particular, they struggle so much because they can't initiate anything. They can if they then choose to be a writer or be a director or be a producer. But as actors, they can't initiate anything. They have to be part of something else. We don't have that limitation as writers, right? Like the medium that you choose influences that a lot. If you want to be a writer for a game, probably can't initiate anything. But you can if you choose to do Twine, right? Which is a text-based medium and is interactive. Is it going to be Hades? Like, no, but it's going to be like a game that somebody can play through. It might not have all these beautiful visuals or the degree of interactivity you want, but you can. Same with comics, right? Like then you need an artist. Do you know an artist that you can work with? Maybe you can find one to like pay for cheap or who can collaborate with you because you're both starting out and is willing to do some kind of creator-owned deal because they know you can't afford to pay them. And if you don't know anybody and if you have nobody like that, you could do stick figures, right? Is it what you want to do? Probably not, but like you can. And I think we like get so caught up in how we want to approach a thing that we kind of ignore the realities of the ways that we do have available to us. And it's like, if that sounds bad to you and if making a comic like that sounds bad and you don't have the resources, then do prose. Prose is the cheapest, right? Like by far. And if you don't want to do any physical publishing, you just put it online. There's so many platforms out there, right? Between like Wattpad and Royal Road and like so many of these other websites now where, how much money are you going to be putting in? Like maybe you need to commission a cover and that's it. Like that's probably as cheap as it really can get in terms of like writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And addendum to add to that, which I really want to stress, is that's all you can do. That's all you have access to. We don't use AI. I'm so sick of, I'm in a lot of writers groups on Facebook, and these people put these like trash covers, and they're like, what do you think? And everyone's like, this person has 12 fingers and the eyes are looking two opposite directions. And they'll be like, no, I got an artist. And like 12 comments later, they'll confess they used AI. And it just drives me insane that they, it's the hypocrisy of the fact their writing is valued and it should be copyrighted and protected, but they're happy sort of scalping artists to like create some, like not even create, but just kind of like mash together something for their benefit.
Yeah, there's a world in which AI could have been executed on in a way that was more ethical, and it simply wasn't, right? Like they strip mined the internet and took people's property to like then create these engines, which they're now selling. Like that doesn't make sense. And so many artists will not want to work with you if they've seen that you've published content used by AI. So if that's something that's of interest to you, even if it's a purely practical consideration, I don't think it's worth it, right? It's not worth the potential fallout from an audience. It's not worth the potential fallout from future collaborators. Even if we're looking at it purely from a practical point of view and like ignoring the like ethical dimension, which, I'm not saying that we should. I just don't see the value there.
No, definitely not. We had it in a Bradford Literature Festival, which is near us. They did some AI generated artwork for their festival last year and had a massive outcry. And that felt like the first kind of like in the UK, like a sort of really like big institution being called out for using it. And unnecessarily as well, it was only for like a handful of graphics, so they clearly had other artists available to them that they could have worked with, but they used it and had a massive backlash. It was really interesting. Sorry, that was just like a little, I just like the way of you saying like, look at all the resources you have. Like you might want to do a comic book and you don't want to use stick figures, but like at the end of the day, if that's what the resource you have for yourself and that means you create something, just do it. And that was a really nice line.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean it can't be successful, right? Like Dinosaur Comics was using like dinosaur clip art and like, there's a bunch of like stick figure comics. I'm trying to think of one in particular. I can't remember. Like XKCD is a good one. Yes. But, there's a ton out there. Like no matter what you choose, you can kind of pursue it. And yeah, I think AI is kind of a like siren's call, like, another trap to probably avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've come to our final question of the interview. Again, just thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation, and just a really different one as well, like compared to the other guests that we've had on. And this has been really interesting to kind of dig into an area that we've not covered yet. But we are going to kind of take it back to the question we ask all of our guests, because this does boil down to a love of literature, a love of writing. What's your favourite book?
Yeah, my favorite book is The Little Prince. I've read it a bunch of times and a bunch of copies. I'm French originally, so I was born in France and grew up in the States. So I've read it in both languages. I have, let's see, I don't know if I could show it, but I have a tattoo of it. You can only see part of it.
That's amazing.
Sorry, not a great angle on it.
No.
But yeah, I just love it. I think it has so much value. I think it's, an awesome little tiny book, which is also reassuring for, when big projects feel intimidating, that like the size of it doesn't necessarily mean it can't be super impactful to me personally. It's just amazing in so many ways. Obviously, it's massively popular around the world. It's not really as well known here in the States, surprisingly, but that's my favorite book.
I love that. Yeah, that's really
We've not had anyone so decisive on their favourite book. Like, we're so used to people like, oh, it's such a hard question. And we're like, yeah, we're sorry. I think we were both experiencing it. You're like, nope, Little Prince. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's so many books that I love, right? And I think I have a harder time if you ask me like movies or video games or even comics. But that one's just been so influential to me. And like, it's the only book I have like 8 copies of, right? Like it's not, I think it's, for me at least, that one's definitely a little bit easier to be decisive with.
Yeah, that's cool. God, I really like that.
Yeah. Well, and to sort of explain to you and to remind our listeners, we are going to put together a list of all our book recommendations for our guests.
Oh, awesome.
Because we've asked every single one and it's been really interesting.
Just how varied they've been as well.
It is, yeah, we've had lots of variety. I remember Little Prince relates to Kalain, who's a poet, and he talked about books that he reads to his children being his favourite books because that time that was really beautiful. So it's sort of similar energy, sort of influence.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it used to be read to me growing up as well. That seems like it'll be a great reading list for people.
Yeah, I hope so. And we'll probably read it because on reflection, I can't remember what sort of people said in the first season back in January. So we'll have to reread ourselves.
But other than that, I think that's it for our conversation. But thank you so much for joining us again.
It's been
thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you bearing with my rants and diatribes on different parts of this, but you guys asked great questions.
Absolutely not. No, I love it when people kind of get lost in something they're passionate about. It's one of the best things about recording this podcast, just watching someone just completely get lost in their thoughts. And yeah, it's brilliant. So thank you again.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much,
thank
Jeremy.
You both.
We'll sign off.
All right,
see you later. So we just come off the phone from Jeremy from overseas.
But overseas, Hannah loves this.
Jeremy. I just feel like we finally made it because we've had like an overseas guest.
International. Yeah. This is the thing for you. This is like what a way to end
it, and like as well to speak to someone with just such a vast amount of experience.
Yeah.
And we can just tell someone really knows what they're talking about as well. So I was just really enjoying just listening to everything he was saying.
But so like passionately accessible as well. Like he wasn't trying to alienate you and be like, look how clever I am. Like he was like, here's everything I know and I want to talk about it, and it was good.
That's it. I love it when you get people like that who, rather than trying to keep everything they've learned to themselves, kind of quite selfishly because they don't want other people to progress. I love the fact that he's been your mentor. I bet he's been such a great mentor.
He's been great, especially like being made redundant and like everything that's happened this year. There's not been a moment where he's kind of given up on me and stepped back. He's just been like, let's keep going, like when you need it. And I haven't written, I thought, by the end of the original mentoring scheme, which was about 8 months, I think it is supposed to be, I haven't written a portfolio. I haven't done the bark sheets I wanted and the piece of work I wanted to show off and develop my skills there. And he still wants to talk to me, and he's just so kind and patient. And I know that when the time comes and I'm ready to have the time and the energy and the creativity to write that stuff, I'm sure, understanding his capacity, as you've heard, he's got loads on.
Yeah.
He'll be willing to take a look, and my work will improve and benefit from that.
Yeah, I mean, the projects he's working on sound brilliant as well. I mean,
yeah,
he does definitely cover a wide range of mediums, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. But you can just tell that he's fully kind of dedicated to his to each of them, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell that he's not doing this for financial gain, he's doing this for genuine love of writing. And I think I know exactly what he means. You just want to try everything, but actually sometimes that can hold you back. I mean, it really resonated when he was saying that he'd actually be a lot further along in his career if he just chose one of those mediums.
Yeah.
But we just want to do it all because it's fun.
We do. I mean, I'm working on a poetry show at the minute, I've been working on for a while, and a collection, and then the creative task for this,
and your novel,
and my novel,
and then apparently games,
and less like in an ideal world. But yeah, like I appreciate just when you're creative and you just have that. Well, you've got your play and your novel and your poetry, so like there's stuff going on for you as well.
Yeah.
I think as writers, there's like when you have that moment of inspiration, you just want to take it. And if it's like, this is a play, it's going to be a play, let's take it, let's go. You have to go with it.
I just live in fear that wave of creativity or that wave of inspiration will leave me if I don't jump on it there and then. So yeah, I think we're all like that, aren't we? Yeah. But what did you take from that kind of creatively? What do you think we could use from Jeremy to inspire our next task? Our final task of the season.
Our final task of the season. I think I referenced Kalain in the interview, and that like don't wait vibe of just getting going. I think Jeremy had that as well, like when he's talking about like breaking it down, like if you want to do a comic book and you can write it but you can't find an artist to work with, don't use AI. which is we're on drive home. Don't use AI. It is scalping. It is stealing people's work, and we don't like it. But you have the ability to go and do stuff. I was thinking if you could make a comic book, you could make a collage comic book and use that. Use photographs and I'm not sure how it work. Copyright. I'll hold my hands up. But if you could collage your way, if you could find copyright free art that is I know lots of museums have digitized their art, which is really cool. And you could collage like that. I don't know how it would work, but that's another way of breaking it down and be still being creative and not having to use stick figures. So I think that don't wait is the centre of it for me. And we've just touched on all the creative projects that I'm working on. But maybe I will there's a couple of things I've got on the drawing board, and I think it'd be nice to go and look at them and maybe don't wait in the sense of I'm not going to actively start something new, but actually planning it out and using the structure of this podcast and being this isn't the idea, but I'm going to write a pamphlet on plants, which I could easily do because we're surrounded by them in this room. And then I go into the planning stage of what's a pamphlet and how many poems is it and where's this going to go and what's even stuff even that marketability that he talked about, what time of year would I like it to be published in and stuff. And then I could go into the first draft and okay, if I want 16 good poems, that's realistically I need to write probably 30 poems drill down. Cool, okay, I'm going to write 30 poems. What's the arc of this going to be? Am I going to look at multiple plants or focus on one plant and rotate it into what seasons? I don't know. And then go into editing and talk about the editing of this pamphlet and just do a really detailed plan. So that when the moment comes and I'm right, I have the window now, I want to work on this, I can open it up and go, a plan where I can see, 4 months worth of work with a bit of research on who I want to send this pamphlet to or competitions I want to submit it to.
Yeah.
The don't wait, I'm going to apply to a planning structure approach for a project that I want to make in the future.
No, I think that's really good. And you are incorporating all the elements of the podcast in there. You kind of thinking about the stage of it. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one. And I think that is definitely something that's come across from a lot of our guests. Why wait? If you've got something you're proud of, don't wait for someone else to validate that and get it out there. And
and he touched on the physicality of having your work out there and your creation out there. I think that's true. I think it'd be fun. So maybe even just using that structure to create something. Were very useful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, mine was, it's similar to what we've talked about in the past in terms of maybe reformatting your work, seeing it through a different lens. But I was thinking about this idea of video game writing, and it's something I've never even considered. And I just imagine it's quite a fun or maybe interesting writing task to think about. If you were to make a piece of writing interactive, how would you do it? How would you make it so that there's a little bit of audience participation in it? I don't know. And I was just thinking about maybe some of my novel writing. If I was to turn it into a video game, how would that work?
You need to at least watch videos on Thank Goodness You're Here.
Yeah.
It's this kind of it's a set in Barnstable or something. It's a Barnsley. It's made by a company in Barnsley.
Okay.
And it's a fictionalized Barnsley.
My sister's told me about this.
I'm sure Sophie's probably played it. I feel look in the camera being Sophie, get your sister on it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's very weird. It's very northern. It's a little bit rude. In Write Club, Owen tried to recommend it to someone, and I was a bit
okay.
Owen,
are you sure?
think this is the content for our lovely ladies that join us. Probably wouldn't be appropriate. Don't want to see, but probably not. It's really fun, and it has that kind of yours is a much more personal experience of northernness.
Yeah.
But it's a really there's a lot of good voice acting in it, and the narrative's quite strange.
Yeah.
And it's quite an easy, clickable video.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I will look into that because it's something I'm intrigued about. I think I didn't realise until I kind of doing a bit of research for this episode. Actually, just the depth and width and breadth, that's what I'm trying to think of games that are available.
Yes.
Because I think straight away, the thing that puts me off video gaming is that I don't like when there's lots going on, action, thriller, horror. It all seems to be very gore. I don't like that. It really stresses me out. In actual fact, I think that's why I like Animal Crossing, because I like just having my own little world.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise that actually there's some games that are just about a bit of escapism, just from real life, but it's an alternative life or something. I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, maybe just think, have you got some poems, or have you got a short story or a novel?
Or a monologue.
Or a monologue, yeah. If you were to put that into a video game, how would that look? How would that work? I think that'd be a really interesting writing exercise.
I think it would. I think you definitely have time to take a look
Have
at
a
that.
bit time.
Just keep him in there for a little, keep him brewing, and take time to try and make your own video game.
Nice.
Maybe it's something we need to, like, a long-term plan, maybe a little bit of social media content. I could get Alex, my partner who works in video games, to do a little, or one of his friends who is actually a video game writer, to put a little like cheat sheet on, like, maybe a few books, a few games to play that give you a bit of breadth, maybe some sort of writing exercises, that kind of thing, to intro people, because I think until I really encountered video games through my partner as an industry, I didn't realise quite how much narrative goes into it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I think that'd be really fun. I think I might do that. I'm probably not in the next week before we get to episode 5, but I think that sounds really, really fun. I'm really intrigued to see how you do it.
Yeah, no, me too. I really like the idea of people being able to choose their own story. Oh God, I can't remember what it was, but I was reading a book with my kids, and it was like that. And you would basically turn to the page.
Yeah, choose your own adventure stuff.
Yeah, and I do really think that's really interesting. So
maybe
like,
book.
I've never seen that done with a poetry collection. Turn to this poem. I don't know. I think it's intricate, and it could get quite complicated, but I actually think it could be a really cool thing to do. So yeah, that's my creative task this week.
You should look into The Dark Room, which is the world's like only real life video game, and that's text based. I took my parents to see it in Edinburgh this year, and it was the most incredible experience. I don't want to see if there's anything online about it. If not, I'll tell you more about it between us. But you start off, you wake up in a dark room, and you get picked, like someone from the audience gets picked.
Oh.
They're called Darren, I believe. I think it's Darren. They hello, my name's Steve. No, it's not today, it's Darren. And then they get an option. It's like, you're in a dark room. It's like, turn on the light, walk north, go to sleep, eat something. And then you have to pick. And it just spirals away from you. And it's done by this amazing Australian comedian who's very, very funny.
Wow.
And it's another sort of interactive thing I'd really recommend.
Cool.
I took my parents, and my mum spent the whole time looking at me and laughing. And my dad was just like, they had a great time. It was great.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Yeah.
But you see, naturally my mind went to something really bad's going to happen there.
No,
that's the like the fact it's a comedy.
It is
like that.
Delightful.
Yeah,
it's so funny. This year, this guy, he's doing 3 shows a day. He's doing the kids' dark room, a standard dark room, and his own show, and that's at the Edinburgh Fringe. So he was doing 3 shows a day for 30 days.
Oof, wow.
With like maybe taking his Mondays off, and that's it. Like, absolute commitment, but it's brilliant, and it was sold out basically every night.
Yeah.
You're yawning. Let's wrap it up. Sorry, I'm just excited.
It's been pregnant tiredness. But yeah, that's it for today. We really enjoyed speaking to Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, big thanks to him. It was lovely.
It was. And we'll be back for our final ever episode. Well, ever, we'll say. But final episode of the season, definitely.
Yeah, final episode of the season for definite next week. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. What a good job, Hannah.
Well, thank you. In fact, bringing Jeremy into my life, bringing all these people into my life, actually. A lot of the guests that we've spoken to, I would have never had that opportunity if it wasn't for you. So thank you.
Oh, great.
And we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.